The air over naval amphibious base, Coronado, hung thick and heavy, a humid blanket woven from salt spray, diesel fumes, and the ceaseless hum of martial readiness. It smelled of purpose. Asphalt shimmered under the oppressive California sun, turning the vast parking lot of the base clinic into a black, heat-radiating griddle. In this world of sharp angles and sharper men, Elias Thorne moved like a ghost from another era. He was 82 years old, a collection of gentle curves and softened edges. His car, a 1998 Buick LeSabre the color of faded seafoam, was an extension of himself. It was immaculate, cared for with a quiet devotion that bordered on reverence, but it was undeniably old, a relic navigating a landscape of aggressive, modern machines. Elias guided the Buick with practiced slowness toward the handicapped parking space directly in front of the clinic's sliding glass doors. His hands, spotted with age and traced with a fine tremor, were nonetheless rock steady on the worn leather of the steering wheel. The tremor lived in his left hand, a souvenir from a long-ago fever in a place he no longer named, but it vanished the moment he held something with intent. A steering wheel, a garden spade, a memory. He was here for a routine checkup, a quarterly dance with the VA doctors who monitored the aging architecture of his body with a mixture of clinical detachment and genuine curiosity. They saw a patient, a polite, quiet old man with a heart that beat a little too slowly and lungs that held the faint, ghostly rattle of a life lived hard. They did not see the framework beneath the facade. As the Buick's front tire kissed the concrete parking block, a sound ripped through the quiet lot. It was a blast from a horn, not of warning, but of pure, arrogant impatience. The sound was followed by the guttural roar of an engine designed to intimidate. Elias glanced in his rearview mirror. Filling the entire frame was the grille of a truck that looked less like a vehicle and more like a piece of siege equipment. It was a Ford Raptor, jacked so high its tires came up to the Buick's windows, painted a tactical matte black that drank the sunlight. Every inch of it screamed for attention, from the aggressive LED light bars on its roof to the Punisher skull decal plastered on the rear window. Inside, 3 men sat like gods in their mobile throne room. They were young, carved from the kind of prime muscle and sun-burnished confidence that the Coronado base produced in abundance. SEALs. You could tell by the easy, predatory grace with which they held themselves, even when sitting still. The man in the driver's seat, Lieutenant Deckard, was the apex of the trio. His jaw was a sharp line of certainty, his eyes hidden behind expensive sunglasses that reflected the world back at itself. He saw the old man in the old car taking the best spot in the lot, and a familiar irritation sparked in his gut. The world, in Deckard's well-ordered mind, belonged to the strong, the fast, the relevant. This old man, this relic was none of those things. He was a speed bump on the road of Deckard's very important day. Deckard leaned on the horn again, a long, obnoxious bleat. The sound bounced off the clinic walls. A few people heading inside paused, their attention drawn to the looming black truck and the small, seafoam-colored car. It was menacing. Elias finished his parking maneuver, his movements unhurried. He put the car in park, the transmission making a soft, familiar clunk. He did not look back. He was a stone in a river, and the noise was just the water rushing past. This stillness, this absolute refusal to be hurried or intimidated, was a language Deckard did not speak. It translated in his mind as disrespect. He threw the truck in a park, the gears grinding in protest, and vaulted out of the driver's seat. His 2 companions, younger enlisted men who orbited him like moons, followed suit. They moved with a synchronized, cocksure swagger, their boots hitting the asphalt with authority. "Hey!" Deckard's voice was a sharp crack in the humid air. "I'm talking to you, Pops." Elias turned his head slowly, his gaze meeting Deckard's through the open driver's side window. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, but they held a depth that was unsettling, like looking down a deep, cold well. He did not speak. He simply waited. "You see this spot?" Deckard gestured expansively, as if claiming territory. This is prime real estate. I need it. Mission critical. You need to move that piece of junk. The lie was casual, effortless. His only mission was to get a post-workout smoothie from the small exchange inside the clinic. But mission critical was a key that opened doors. It was a phrase that demanded deference. Elias's gaze drifted from Deckard's face down to the blue handicap sign, then back up. He lifted a single, steady finger and tapped it twice on the plastic placard hanging from his rearview mirror. The universal symbol of a figure in a wheelchair was faded from years of sun. The gesture was clear. The statement was made. No words were necessary. This quiet, logical correction was more infuriating to Deckard than any shouted insult could have been. It was the calm of the old man that felt like a challenge. "I see your little tag," Deckard sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "What's the matter? Arthritis flare-up? Need to get to your bingo game in a hurry." His friends snickered on cue. They were a chorus for his ego. Elias's expression did not change. He had heard worse from better men. He had faced down interrogators in languages he barely understood, men whose threats were not idle, but promises of cold, dark places. This boy, with his manufactured rage and his performative toughness, was just noise. He reached for the door handle. Deckard moved, planting a hand on the Buick's door, holding it shut. The sudden proximity brought the lieutenant's world into sharp focus for Elias. The smell of expensive cologne, sweat, and something metallic like gunpowder or ambition. "I don't think you're hearing me," Deckard said, his voice low and menacing now. "I am an officer in the United States Navy. This is a military installation. My business here takes precedence over your convenience. Move the car." Now, across the parking lot, near the designated smoking area, Hospital Corpsman Third Class Miller watched the scene unfold. Miller was young, barely 21, but he'd been on this base long enough to learn its social ecosystems. He knew Lieutenant Deckard by reputation. A warrior, yes. A brilliant operator in the field by all accounts. But on base, in a mundane world between deployments, he was a bully. A man who confused his rank with royalty. Miller also knew the old man. Mr. Thorne. He came in every few months. Always polite, always quiet. He had a file as thick as a phone book, but most of it was classified or redacted, sealed by orders from decades ago. Miller had once asked a senior chief about it. The chief had just shaken his head. "Some stones you don't turn over, document. Just be polite to him. He's earned it." Now, Miller saw the lieutenant putting his hand on the old man's car, saw the casual aggression in his posture. A knot of cold anger tightened in his stomach. This was wrong. It was fundamentally, institutionally wrong. Back at the car, Elias looked at the hand on his door. It was a large hand, calloused and strong. A warrior's hand. But it was also an undisciplined hand. A hand that knew how to break things, but not how to build them. "You serve?" Deckard's eyes caught the veteran plate on the Buick. He laughed, a short, ugly bark. "What did you do, son? Pushing paper in Saigon? Or were you a cook? Bet you made a mean chipped beef on toast." Elias's gaze remained steady. "Something like that," he said. His voice was a low rasp, like stones tumbling in a dry riverbed. It was the first time he had spoken. The sound of it, gravelly and ancient, seemed to catch Deckard off guard for a split second. Then his arrogance reasserted itself. "Yeah, I thought so. Look, I don't have time for this. Show me your ID and your disability documentation. I want to see if that placard is even legitimate." The demand was a gross overreach of authority. A lieutenant had no right to demand medical paperwork from a civilian in a parking lot. It was a pure power play, an act of humiliation. Elias did not move to get his wallet. Instead, his eyes drifted to a small pin on the lapel of his worn, khaki jacket. It was a simple thing, made of black enamel, no bigger than a thumbnail. A fox's head, rendered in stark, angular lines. It was so faded and unassuming as to be almost invisible. Deckard's eyes followed his gaze. He squinted, then let out another derisive snort. "What's that little trinket? Your high school mascot?" Your garden club membership. He leaned closer, his shadow falling over Elias in the driver's seat. You know, back in the day, the real operators, they had call signs. Names they earned in the fire. I bet your call sign was Pops, wasn't it? Or maybe Old Timer. The words. Call sign. The pin. The fox. The world tilted for a moment. The bright California sun bled away, replaced by the flat, gray light of a winter sky over the Ural Mountains. The smell of salt and asphalt became the scent of pine, frozen earth, and a faint, acrid tang of high-grade explosives. He wasn't in a Buick. He was wedged in the cramped cockpit of a suborbital insertion vehicle, the one they call the Needle. The air was thin, recycled, tasting of metal. A voice crackled in his ear, tinny and distant, stretched across thousands of miles of encrypted ether. Carbon Fox, do you have the package? I repeat, is the package secure? His own hand, younger than, gloved and sure, reached out. It did not adjust a car's air conditioning vent. It toggled a switch on a detonation timer, the numbers glowing a malevolent red in the gloom. Beside him, a man was shivering, not from cold, but from a terror so profound it had become a physical ailment. The man was a Soviet rocket scientist, the package, and he held the secrets that could avert a war or start one. The package is secure, he had transmitted back, his voice as calm then as it was now. The fox is back in a hole. The memory was not a thought. It was a physical sensation. The ghost of crushing G-forces. The echo of a promise made in a dark room in Langley. The weight of a nation's security resting on the steadiness of his hands. He blinked. The sun was back. The arrogant face of Lieutenant Deckard hung in his vision. The past receded, leaving only a faint chill in its wake. Corpsman Miller saw the shift. He saw the old man's eyes glaze over for a second, a flicker of something vast and terrible passing behind them. He also saw Deckard's patience finally snap. That was it. The line had been crossed. Miller dropped his half-smoked cigarette, grinding it into the pavement with his heel. He turned his back to the confrontation, making it look like he was walking away. He pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen. He didn't call the MPs. They were too low on the food chain. Deckard could charm or bully his way out of that. He scrolled through his contacts to a number he had been given in his first week at the clinic by the same senior chief who had warned him about Mr. Thorne's file. If you ever see anyone giving that old man a hard time, the chief had said, and I mean anyone, you call this number. Don't ask questions. Just call. The contact was listed simply as the zookeeper. It was the direct line to the office of the base commander's master chief. Miller pressed send. I'm done asking, Deckard snarled, his frustration boiling over into action. He was tired of the silence, tired of the defiance he perceived in the old man's stillness. He reached into the open window. His fingers, quick and practiced, closed around the keys still dangling in the Buick's ignition. He yanked them free. I'll move this heap for you, old-timer, he said, a triumphant smirk spreading across his face. As he pulled his hand back, he gave the car door a hard shove. It wasn't a full-blown assault, but it wasn't gentle. The heavy metal door swung inward, bumping hard against Elias's leg, just above the knee. A dull, throbbing pain radiated from the point of impact. It was the same knee that had been shattered by a piece of shrapnel outside a safe house in East Berlin in 1973. The same knee that a team of agency doctors had rebuilt with pins and wires, promising him he'd walk without a limp. They had been wrong. Elias did not cry out. He did not even flinch. He simply absorbed the impact, his body a silent testament to a lifetime of absorbing pain. But in his eyes, something shifted. The deep, cold well grew colder still. Deckard dangled the keys, enjoying his victory. See? Was that so hard? He turned to walk toward the driver's side door, ready to put the old man in his place once and for all. He never made it. A new sound cut through the air. It wasn't a horn or an engine. It was the sharp, piercing chirp of tires fighting for traction on hot asphalt. A black Chevrolet Suburban, the kind used by high-ranking officials, swung into the parking lot at a speed that was both reckless and perfectly controlled. It bore the eagle and stars of a full colonel. It did not slow down. It raced down the lane, its lights now flashing in a silent, urgent strobe, and screeched to a halt, positioning itself to block both the Buick and Deckard's massive truck. The maneuver was so sudden, so aggressive, it was as if the hand of God had descended to stop the confrontation. Two military police trucks followed in its wake, their blue and red lights painting the scene in frantic colors. The parking lot, which had been a stage for a small drama, was now frozen in a tableau of shock. Every head turned. Conversations died. Deckard and his men froze mid-swagger, their mouths slightly agape. The passenger door of the Suburban flew open before the vehicle had fully settled. A man emerged, and he was the personification of command. Colonel Vance, the base commander. He was a tall man, lean and hard, his uniform pressed into razor-sharp creases. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. His eyes, like chips of flint, swept the scene and locked onto Deckard. For a moment, Deckard thought the colonel was angry about the parking dispute, maybe about the commotion. He felt a flicker of anxiety, but his ego was a powerful shield. He was a SEAL. They were the tip of the spear. They got things done. A little parking lot dust-up was beneath the colonel's notice. He was wrong. Colonel Vance's gaze passed over him, as if he were an inanimate object, a piece of trash on the ground. He didn't spare a glance for Deckard's friends or for the gawking onlookers. His entire focus, his entire being, was aimed like a weapon at the open window of the 1998 Buick LeSabre. He marched across the asphalt, his steps precise and powerful. The MPs, emerging from their trucks, formed a loose, silent perimeter. Corpsman Miller watched from the smoking area, his heart pounding against his ribs. Vance did not stop until he was standing directly beside Elias's door. He planted his feet. His back went ramrod straight. He raised his right hand, fingers locked together, and snapped it to the brim of his cover in the sharpest, most profound salute Deckard had ever witnessed. It was not a perfunctory gesture of respect. It was an act of pure, unadulterated reverence. A knight saluting his king. The silence in the parking lot became absolute, a ringing, heavy void. Mr. Thorne, Colonel Vance's voice was a low rumble, but it carried across the blacktop with perfect clarity. "It is an honor, sir. I apologize for the disturbance." Elias looked up at the colonel. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "Colonel," he acknowledged, his voice still a gravelly whisper. Deckard stood there, keys still dangling from his fingers, his mind struggling to process the scene. A full bird colonel, the commander of the entire base, was saluting the old man. Calling him sir, it did not compute. The world had turned upside down. Vance held the salute for a long moment, his eyes locked on Elias. Then, without dropping his hand, he turned his head, his neck muscles cording. His flint-like eyes found Deckard. The full force of his fury, which had been held in check, was now unleashed. "Lieutenant," he began, and the word was not a rank, it was an accusation. "Do you have any idea who you were speaking to?" Deckard was speechless. He could only shake his head, a tiny, pathetic movement. "Of course you don't," Vance roared, his voice now echoing off the clinic walls. "You are too busy admiring yourself in the reflection of your ridiculous truck to recognize your own history. You see an old man. I see a pillar upon which this entire institution was built." The colonel's eyes swept over the small crowd of onlookers, transforming them from spectators into students in a harsh, impromptu history lesson. "You men," he barked, his voice aimed at Deckard, but intended for everyone. "You were the Trident. You call yourselves the teams you think you are the bleeding edge. And you are. But you are the edge of a spear that was forged by men like this." He gestured with his chin toward Elias. "This is Elias Thorne. To you, he is Mr. Thorne, but to the men who fought the real wars, the ones in the shadows, the ones that were never declared and whose victories were never celebrated, he was known by another name. Vance paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The KGB had a name for him. The Stasi had a name for him. They whispered it in their secure briefing rooms in Moscow and East Berlin. It was the name of the ghost they could never catch, the operative who could walk through walls. They called him Prizrak the Spectre. A murmur went through the crowd. But his own people, Vance continued, his voice dropping slightly, taking on a tone of reverent awe. We had a better name for him, a name he earned in the frozen hell of the Cold War. His call sign was Carbon Fox. The name hung in the hot, still air. Carbon Fox. It sounded like something from a spy novel, a piece of fiction. But the look on the colonel's face made it terrifyingly real. Carbon Fox, Vance repeated, his eyes boring into Deckard. In 1968, he spent 3 weeks behind the Iron Curtain with no support, evading Spetsnaz hunter-killer teams to plant surveillance devices that gave us a decade of invaluable intelligence. In 1973, he walked into the heart of a Stasi prison to pull out a compromised agent, and walked out with the agent and their entire command structure. And in 1981, he performed a solo halo jump into a blizzard in the Ural Mountains to extract a Soviet scientist who was about to give them first strike capability. He carried that man on his back for 50 miles through enemy territory. Single-handedly, he prevented a war that would have ended the world. Vance finally, slowly, dropped his salute. He took a step toward Deckard, his presence so immense that the young SEAL instinctively took a step back. You, Lieutenant, in your 400-horsepower monument to your own ego, decided to harass that man. You questioned his service. His service is the silent, unthanked reason you have the freedom to be as colossally ignorant as you are today. The colonel's voice dropped to a lethal whisper, a sound more terrifying than his roar. And then you put your hands on him. You touched him. Vance looked from Deckard to the Buick keys still in his hand. Master at arms, he commanded, not turning his head. 2 burly MPs stepped forward instantly. Take this officer and his 2 associates into custody. They are to be confined to the brig, pending a captain's mast. Lieutenant Deckard, you are on report for conduct unbecoming an officer, gross insubordination, dereliction of duty, and assault on a civilian who holds the Distinguished Service Cross, the Navy Cross, and a Presidential Medal of Freedom, so secret most of the Joint Chiefs don't even know it exists. Deckard's face had gone from tan to a pasty, sickly white. The universe he had built for himself, where he was the hero, the protagonist, had crumbled into dust around him. He looked at Elias, at the quiet old man in the quiet old car, and for the first time he saw him. He saw not weakness, but a stillness born of absolute control. He saw not age, but history. The MPs took his arms. Deckard didn't resist. The keys fell from his limp fingers, clattering onto the asphalt. Colonel, Vance said, turning to his driver. Have this thing, he gestured to the black truck with utter contempt, towed to the base impound lot. Lieutenant Deckard can figure out how to get it back after he spent a month chipping paint off a frigate in the Bering Strait. Because I assure you all, his career in naval special warfare is over. Effective immediately, he is a disgrace to the trident his better men died for. The MPs led Deckard and his 2, now terrified, friends away. They walked with their heads down, the swagger gone, replaced by the shuffling gait of the condemned. The parking lot remained silent, the onlookers stunned into immobility. Colonel Vance bent down, picked up the Buick's keys, and walked back to Elias's window. He held them out. Mr. Thorne, again, my deepest apologies. Elias finally moved. He pushed his door open, the abused joint groaning in protest, and slowly, carefully got to his feet. He stood, a little stooped, his old jacket hanging loosely on his thin frame. He took the keys from the colonel. He's just a boy, Colonel, Elias said, his voice soft but clear, full of fire and vinegar. The world needs boys like that. He looked in the direction the disgraced SEALs have been taken. They just need to be aimed in the right direction. Sometimes the young forget that the river they stand in started as a trickle high in the mountains. He showed no anger, no satisfaction, only a profound, weary wisdom, and perhaps a flicker of pity. "Let me escort you inside, sir," Vance offered. Elias shook his head gently. "Thank you, Colonel, but I can manage. I'm just here for my checkup. Don't want to be late." He turned and began his slow, limping walk toward the clinic's automatic doors. As he moved, a path cleared before him. The crowd of sailors, officers, and civilians parted for him, not with fear, but with a new, profound respect. They saw him now. They saw the ghost who walked among them. Elias Thorne, Carbon Fox, walked into the air-conditioned coolness of the clinic and disappeared from view. The silence he left behind was the loudest sound the parking lot had ever heard. In the weeks that followed, the story of the Carbon Fox incident became a quiet legend on the base. Lieutenant Deckard was, as promised, stripped of his trident and reassigned to a desolate communications outpost in Adak, Alaska. His friends received lesser, but still career-altering, punishments. His truck sat in the impound lot for 3 months. Colonel Vance, true to his word, implemented a new training module for all incoming personnel, from the rawest recruit to the most seasoned officer. It was a history lesson, focusing on the quiet professionals of the Cold War and other forgotten conflicts. The final slide of the mandatory presentation was a simple, grainy black-and-white photograph of a young Elias Thorne in unmarked fatigues, his face hard and his eyes ancient even then. Below, it was a single sentence: "Respect the silence." It might be louder than you think. Corpsman Miller received a quiet, personal thank you from Colonel Vance, along with a Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal for sound judgment and decisive action in a critical situation. He never spoke of the phone call he made. He just continued to do his job, though he always stood a little straighter whenever he saw Mr. Thorne's old Buick pull into the parking lot. And Elias? Elias continued his life undisturbed. He went to his appointments. He tended the small, meticulously ordered garden in his backyard in Chula Vista. He pruned his roses with hands that no longer trembled when they held the shears. He sat on his porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the Pacific, the sky turning the color of blood and gold. He was a man at peace with his ghosts, a legend content to be a footnote. He had saved the world in secret, and his reward was the quiet anonymity of this garden, this porch, this life. He asked for nothing more. The greatest warriors are not the ones who make the most noise, but the ones whose silence carries the weight of history.